Okay, let's unpack this. If you're living in or even just following Japan, you you know the symptoms. You've seen the pressure on its logistics system.
Oh, absolutely. That chronic problem of redelivery, right?
Yeah.
And the constant struggle to find drivers.
Exactly. And just the sheer human effort it takes to keep those legendary reliability levels going.
And that is exactly why we're doing this deep dive. Our sources today are really pushing us to step away from framing this as, a simple failure of efficiency.
Or worse, a failure of manners, which you hear sometimes.
Right. They're the visible ripples on the surface. They're not the cause.
So if it's just not a moral thing, not an operational failure, what is it? What are we focusing on today?
We're looking at something called structural shear. The mission here is to understand this whole situation as a silent rupture.
A silent rupture.
Yeah, the sources use this Japanese phrase, the ummer. It basically means a break that's happening without making a sound. It's a quiet degradation across the entire life membrane of everyday society.
So we're analyzing erosion, not a big sudden collapse.
Precisely. It's not a flame up, it's a slow grind.
I think that focus is so important. It immediately changes the perspective. Because if you see it as erosion, it helps explain our first big observation, which is, well, the strange silence around the whole issue.
That's it. That's the puzzle. When we look at the source material, the data just reveals this fascinating set of contradictions. E-commerce use isn't slowing down.
No, it's rising rapidly.
And with it, the expectation of next day or even same-day delivery, we can call that the fast layer, that expectation is completely locked in now.
So you have this engine of demand that's just accelerating. But at the same time, the redelivery rate is still chronically high, which means the load on the frontline workers is just relentlessly increasing.
Correct. And here's the paradox we really need to grapple with today. This is the most important finding in the sources. Despite all this clear strain, this rising pressure, there's virtually no major social protest.
No widespread public anger.
And very little institutional pressure pushing for, the expensive, large-scale infrastructural changes that seem obviously necessary.
Why not? I mean, this is the core curiosity we're exploring for you, the listener. In a lot of Western markets, if a system is clearly under this much strain, people get angry.
Prices jump. Things change.
Yeah, the system either breaks or it adjusts very loudly. Here, the system is clearly stressed, but it seems to absorb the shock silently. Why doesn't this become a social conflict?
Because the system, well, it still works. It hasn't ground to a complete halt.
Right. My package still arrives.
Exactly. And that continued functioning is precisely what masks the underlying structural weakness. The friction isn't allowed to manifest as, visible social anger. Instead, that structural strain gets converted into social patience.
Yeah, that's the one. That patience becomes the system's temporary and very much unpaid shock absorber.
That's a powerful idea. So the system is designed not to fail spectacularly, but to just transfer the cost of that failure onto social endurance. Exactly. And to really understand the mechanics of that transfer, we have to dissect the shear itself. Let's start with what the sources call vertical shear. Think of it as a speed mismatch.
Okay, like two tectonic plates moving at totally different speeds.
A perfect analogy. So at the top, you have the fast layer. This is pure demand. It's driven by technology and our expectations.
E-commerce, instant delivery.
The massive volume of it, the normalization of speed. And the expectation that delivery should often be free or at least hyper cheap, that whole culture.
That's the engine, always pushing for faster, for instantaneous.
Precisely. Now look at the bottom layer. The slow layer. This is the physical OS. This layer is fixed by things that take decades to change. Geography, biology.
So like buildings, roads.
Exactly. Rigid physical structures like residential housing design, narrow urban roads, and the ultimate fixed structure, human labor.
Yeah.
Specifically, an aging workforce with very real physical limits.
So you have this demand for instant results slamming into the reality of, say, 1980s infrastructure and an aging human body.
Yeah.
That sounds like a guaranteed collision.
It is. And in most developed economies, there's a buffering layer that exists to absorb that difference. It's a shock absorber.
What does that look like?
Things like mandatory price adjustments that reflect the true cost, or a widespread culture of using centralized package lockers, or even just institutional standards that dictate realistic delivery times.
And if I'm following the sources correctly, in Japan, that crucial buffering layer is what, just extremely thin?
It's paper thin. It's too thin to cope with the modern demand. So the result is the fast-moving demand layer is colliding almost directly with that slow, fixed physical structure. The expectation of speed slams right into the physical limitations of the city and the home.
I find this distinction so interesting between the vertical pressure, the speed difference, and what happens when that pressure has nowhere to go. That must be where the horizontal shear comes in, the incompatibility.
That's a perfect synthesis. The fast ECOS is trying to run on hardware that was designed for a totally different economy. It's an incompatibility problem that forces all that strain sideways right onto the worker.
The sources break this down into 3 specific OS systems that haven't been updated. Let's dig into the first one, the housing OS.
Right. So the housing OS in Japan is fundamentally designed for person-to-person exchange. Entrances are built for instant face-to-face receipt.
And crucially, there's no standard for package storage. Delivery boxes are seen as a goodwill add-on by some landlords, not required infrastructure.
Exactly. They aren't standard, like, say, a mandatory mail slot is in an apartment building.
Which means the entire system is built on the assumption that the recipient will always be home and ready, which is just, it's totally incompatible with modern life.
Totally. Now compound that with the second problem, the urban OS. The cities are, masterpieces of density, but the roads are narrow. They're fixed, low-speed structures.
And critically, there's often no designated accessible space for commercial loading and unloading.
None. So the driver is forced to choose. Do I block traffic on this narrow street, or do I park illegally somewhere and run? It puts the driver in an impossible position before they even reach the front door.
A front door that probably doesn't have a secure box anyway.
Precisely. The system itself almost criminalizes the act of delivery. But the biggest point of failure is the third one, the labor OS. Because the housing and urban systems haven't been updated, the entire structural load, all that energy from the shear force, it gets transferred directly onto the individual delivery worker's body.
So the system relies on their physical, individualized effort to absorb all that incompatibility.
It's the only place for the pressure to go.
So if I'm following this isn't a problem of drivers being lazy or inefficient. It's a structural incompatibility that makes their job physically unsustainable.
Yes.
Which brings us back to redelivery. Suddenly, it's not just a statistic about missed packages.
That's right. Our sources redefine redelivery. It's not an inefficiency. It's the collection point of strain.
The collection point of strain.
It's the visual symptom of the entire structural failure. It's that exact moment where the unreceiving house, the unstopping city, and the physically absorbing worker all intersect and surface as one single quantifiable number.
So it's not just a missed delivery. It's the entire weight of the city planning failure, the home design failure, and the e-commerce pressure. All of it landing on one driver's clipboard, forcing them to try again.
Which is why efforts to just reduce redelivery rates, while noble, they tend to just move the strain somewhere else. They don't solve the underlying shear between the operating systems that caused it in the first place. The shear stays active.
Okay, let's connect this to the bigger picture. If we look internationally, how does Japan's response, this sort of quiet absorption, differ from how this same friction shows up in, say, North America or Europe? The sources talk about this silent shear versus a Western type.
What's fascinating here is that in the Western type, when logistical friction appears, it surfaces almost immediately as visible, noisy conflict.
You see it in the market.
You see it in the market, you see swift price increases, you see a clear extension of delivery days. In essence, the consumer experience adjusts very loudly to the reality of the physical layer. And this friction often leads to institutional adjustments.
The system adjusts through pain points that are visible to everyone.
Correct. In Japan, the pathway is different. When friction surfaces, the front line, the site, it absorbs it first. Efforts continue, sometimes almost religiously, to maintain that high user experience, that high quality.
And consumer discontent gets converted back into silence, into that endurance we talked about, Game.
Exactly. The sources note that this isn't destruction, it's wear and tear. It's a slow, quiet grind.
That's a perfect analogy. It's like a machine that doesn't snap suddenly, but just slowly grinds its own gears down because the safety buffer is gone. Why does the culture select for that? For field effort over institutional change?
Well, the expectation is often that a problem is best solved by individual effort. When a new pressure comes along, the default solution is for the worker to push harder, run faster, and maintain that expected quality through sheer physical effort.
Rather than demanding a disruptive, costly redesign of the city or the housing code or the labor contract,
Right. And the hidden non-financial cost of all that silent absorption.
it falls on the worker.
The burden is transferred directly onto the body of the delivery worker. This keeps the physical cost invisible to the consumer, and it keeps the stress non-explosive in the public sphere. Japan's life membrane is structured to be incredibly resistant to immediate catastrophic collapse.
But the trade-off is that the structural fatigue is intensified, and it's delayed.
Significantly delayed. By the time that fatigue becomes impossible to ignore, the fixes are exponentially more expensive and harder to implement.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the takeaway is crystal clear. This is not a situation that's solvable by morality or by willpower. You can't just tell consumers to cooperate more.
No, absolutely not. It's fundamentally an OS incompatibility issue. You have a mismatch of four systems. The high-speed consumer OS clashing with the slow-speed urban OS, housing OS, and labor OS. Let's try harder can't solve a structural clash between systems designed in different centuries.
And the final analytical conclusion, which I think is so key for anyone trying to assess complex systems, is this. Still functioning is not synonymous with structurally sound.
Absolutely. The structural shear is leading to very real long-term costs that are, well, they're already manifesting. You see people quietly exiting the industry because the physical toll is just too high.
Quality slowly deteriorates.
It has to, as the experienced workers leave. The full financial price of the necessary redesign will only become visible much, much later, when comprehensive change is unavoidable. Our sources really emphasize that a structure that is hard to break is also inherently hard to repair.
The longer the silent shear continues, the higher the eventual cost. It's a profound realization that the absence of noise doesn't mean the absence of damage. It just means the damage is being absorbed internally.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. If this quiet structural shear is happening in logistics, a visible, quantifiable system with physical objects moving around, how certain are we that this same silent process of erosion isn't occurring elsewhere across Japan's society? We often assume the biggest problems are the loudest ones, but the sources suggest the quietest forms of strain are often the most expensive to fix later. Because by the time you finally hear the sound, the structural damage is already critical.